I completely understand. I should have made this video earlier when the Switch 2 got announced and actually shut off a week ago, but it sounded like a fitting time to make it now. I'm going to be talking about the title of this video, how Nintendo become as greedy as they were now, and are just becoming a second to Apple Incorporated. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, as you may or may not know, exactly 1 year ago today, as of writing, Nintendo had shut down the online services for our Nintendo 3DS family of systems, which also includes the new Nintendo 3DS and the 2DS. This was probably in some effort to fully remove the 3DS system from Nintendo as a whole, to get people to switch to the paid online services offered by the newer Nintendo Switch. Even if it was just $20 a year for the Switch's online services, that's obviously still more than the $0 a year that you would have to pay for any other Nintendo console's online features. It seems to be around 2018 where Nintendo started becoming more greedy, as that's when Nintendo Switch Online went from being free, just like every other Nintendo console, to $20 a year on the 18th of September 2018. This led to a mild to moderate amount of backlash, but Nintendo brushed it off and they still have paid online to this day. Switch Online also locks many other features behind itself, like saving your games in the cloud, voice chat on the Switch Online app on your phone, which we'll get to, and all of Nintendo's built-in old console emulation features, which consoles like the Nintendo 3DS already had. Speaking of which, in September of 2020, 2 years later, the Nintendo 3DS was officially discontinued, so it was only halfway being supported, with repairs offered and online services in the Nintendo eShop was still being maintained. However, the 3DS was no longer being produced. This would be the first stage of the console's sunsetting. In 2021, it seems that Nintendo really wanted all the money in your wallet and released the expansion pack for Nintendo Switch Online. This just added more consoles to emulate, some extra DLC that goes away for the second your subscription does, and that's it. Nothing else was added to the expansion pack. And here's the worst part. It was 150% more expensive than the normal subscription, going from just a measly $20 per year to $50 per year. If you wanted a family subscription for up to a family of 8, it was 60% more expensive than the original expansion pack, and 4 times the price of the original Nintendo Switch Online subscription at $80 per year. This is comparable to many other subscriptions for other services that require one, such as Netflix and such. Before this, the original $20 a year subscription seemed incomparable to any other subscription on the market, but now with these more expensive options, that is no longer the case. Also, now is a good time to mention that for $200, you can now own a Switch Lite, which had fewer features, non-detachable controllers, and an overall worsened UI/UX. It's bad, but it got a bit better with the release of a much better Nintendo Switch OLED model. This model had a nicer screen, a bigger screen, and overall improvements to the hardware. However, 2 years later, in 2022, Nintendo had announced something was happening to the Nintendo 3DS that people still somewhat used to this point. Nintendo announced that the 3DS would start their second stage of sunsetting the 3DS, which is no longer accepting payment options to buy digital software via the Nintendo eShop. You can now only use funds in your digital wallet, but once that ran dry, it was basically over for you. All you could get now was free demos and updates for existing games. This took place in 2 separate phases, the first being no longer accepting Nintendo eShop cards, and the next being no longer accepting credit or debit cards. At this point, it seemed very clear that Nintendo was going to do something bad to the 3DS any moment now. And, as we all thought, the 3DS's Nintendo eShop got shut down on the 27th of March, 2023. At this point, you could only download free updates and games you already owned within your Nintendo Network ID. This took things to a higher new level, with the absolute blow-up of 3DS modding to pirate 3DS games, as that was the only way to get them, unless you were willing to cough up several $100s on physical copies that were previously bought up by scalpers. And at last, on the 8th of April, 2024, we finished the final stage of the sunset of the 3DS by shutting down online services, which was announced a few months prior. It was the final death as of Nintendo 3DS as we know it. And then people did not get over it, and instead made unofficial services for the 3DS under the name of Pretendo. It does require you to, again, mod your 3DS in order for it to work, which reminds me, if you feel like modding your 3DS, I should direct you over to 3ds.hacks.guide. This is the primo guide for modding your 3DS. It includes up-to-date information, and it is the best option for a 3DS modding tutorial. So if you want to mod your 3DS, then head over there. A quick side tangent on Nintendo trying to revive themselves with two separate services that were also part of Nintendo Switch Online. Nintendo Music, which was a separate Spotify-esque type deal, but it only plays Nintendo music from Nintendo games because releasing Nintendo music anywhere else than by Nintendo themselves will get you DMCA faster than the speed of light. And then there was Nintendo's alarm clock for some reason. It was $100 and it had a few themes based around Nintendo IP. Didn't really catch on. No one really liked it. You could probably make it for like $20 or less or something like that. And so that brings us to a current day where only about a week ago, Nintendo gave us significantly more information on the Nintendo Switch 2 console. This would be great, but it would be even better if the console wasn't $450, not to mention the games are $80 just for the digital version of the games. If you, for some reason, wanted a physical copy instead, that's a $90 price tag. The even better part is that for every game console prior to the Switch 2, if you had a physical copy of a video game, then for the most part, you owned that game. There is nothing the game companies could do to revoke it from you, nothing at all. Unfortunately, the Switch 2 introduced physical game keys. Not cards, but keys. All these game cards had was a 15-character download code to download the game automatically upon inserting the cartridge to give you the illusion of game ownership, while not actually owning the game. So once the Switch 2 gets fully completely shut down in the distant future between 2035 and 2040, you're screwed on physical games. They will not work. There is nothing you can do. The worst part of all of this is specifically what's currently happening in the US, where I live. I won't go into too much detail here, but basically, there are now new tariffs for the US from around half of the countries now, and the country in which the Switch 2 is made gets nearly 50% tariffs. That means if you want a Nintendo Switch 2, you may have to cough up over $600. This isn't an issue if Nintendo is greedy. Nintendo announced the Switch 2's release date a few days before these tariffs started occurring. Nintendo, though, should at least reduce the price for the US to keep things in balance. The US is a small portion of the world, less than 5% of the world's population, and given that Nintendo doesn't have too much of a problem with making money, they have several $billion already, I think it's fair for Nintendo to calm down a little bit to be more considerate of the US. Probably won't happen, but, I mean, who knows. In conclusion, Nintendo is a greedy company who mostly just cares about money. They obviously weren't always like this, but that's how they are now. With the release of Sony's PlayStation 5 and Microsoft's Xbox Series X, it's obviously crucial to not get squeezed out of the video game market, but this is not the way to do it. This will only make them a worse option for playing video games. But hey, maybe we'll do a Nintendo 3DS and reduce the price by $80 a month. I mean, who knows at this point. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later, I guess, maybe.